Continuing at the top of Daf 20b Meseches Beitzah, this is Beitzah Daf 20b. The Bryce here is continuing what Bava ben Buta did to make sure that the halacha was like Beis Hillel in regards to bringing karbonos and doing smicha and yontiv. Vehevi called son Kedar Shabirushalayim. So Bava ben Buta, he brought all of the sheep of Kedar. Rashi says these were the finest sheep. He brought them all from Yerushalayim. Vehemidon ba'azar, and he put them all within the Azara. He stood them up in the Azara. V'yamar, and he said as follows: Kol mi sherodze lismoch, anyone who wants to come and do smicha, yavo v'yismoch, can come and do smicha on these animals. V'yoso hayom gavra yodan shal Beis Hillel, and on that day it ended up that Hillel's hand was stronger. V'kavu halacha kemosan, and they established the halacha like Beis Hillel. V'lo haya sham adam she'ir b'davar klum, there was nobody there that protested at all. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Shuv ma'isa b'talmud echad mitalmidei Beis Hillel. There was another story with one particular student from the students of Beis Hillel. Shehevi olaso la'azar, he brought his carbanola to the Azar, lismoch aleh, to do smicha. Matzu talmud echad mitalmidei Beis Shammai, and a certain student from the students of Beis Shammai found him. Amar lo, he said to him, mazu smicha, what is the smicha that you're doing? Don't we argue and we say you don't have to do smicha? So Amar lo, so the student of Beis Hillel said back to him, mazu shtika, what is this quiet? In other words, you should have been quiet. What are you protesting for? And so Shizku ben Azifa v'halachlo, so he quieted him down by yelling at him, and this particular student of Beis Shammai left. So Amar Abaye, and Abaye said about this story, Hilkach, therefore, Haitzur me Rabbanan damar lechavri milsa, if a particular Talmud Chacham, his friend attacks him about something, says something to him, lo lahadr le milsa tvei mimai damar lechavri, he shouldn't respond with more than that which the attack was. Meaning, Di'iu Amar le, because what did he say to him? What did the student Beis Shammai say to the student Beis Hillel? Just said the words, Mazu smicha, just said those three words, what is this smicha? V'kamahadr le, and what was the response? It was similar, Mazu shtika, what is this quiet? And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Amru lahem Beis Hillel le Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, they said to Beis Shammai the following argument: if in a situation where a regular person is forbidden, mutter legavoa, it's mutter in a situation where it's for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So makom shemutter lehedyot, something in a situation where it's mutter for a regular person, eino din shemutter legavoa, certainly it should be mutter for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi over here explains, makom she'asr lehedyot, meaning Shabbos she'asr lasos lehedyot klum, mutter legavoa atmidun musafin. On Shabbos, for example, you can't do anything when it comes to animals, but you can bring karbanos like carbon tamin and carbon musaf. That's allowed on Shabbos. So makom shemutter lehedyot, in a situation where a regular person it's mutter to prepare food, meaning yomtiv dechsiv hu levadu yasalachem called sad sarchi achila. Anything that has to do with the preparation of food on yomtiv is okay for a regular person. So eino din shemutter legavoa. Certainly, if you're bringing karbanos, everything should be permitted. Called sarchi achilas mizbeach va'afilu olas re'iyah. Even if you're bringing an olas re'iyah, a carbon ola that's an obligation of the yontiv, even that should be permitted. That was Beis Hillel's argument to say that the carbon ola should be permitted to bring it. And so the Gemara continues, Amru lahem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai said back, what are you talking about? Nedarim unedavos yochichu. What about voluntary karbanos that are donations? Nedarim and nedavos. Shemutter lehedyot. Those are mutter lehedyot v'asr legavoa. That's an example of something that's mutter lehedyot and asr legavoa. Rashi over here says Nedarim unedavos yochichu. Sheyontiv makom hamutter lehedyot. Again, yontiv you could do whatever you want to prepare food. V'atem modim lanu. But you admit to us sha'asurim lahakriv. Even you admit you're not allowed to bring the darim and davos. Vein sarche gavoa. That's for the gavoa. So just like you can't bring the darim and davos, so maybe you can't bring the carbon ola and yontiv as well. What kind of proof is that? And so the Gemara says, Amru lahem Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel said back, Mal nedarim unedavos shein kavu lahem zman. When it comes to nedarim and nedavos, there's no set time for that. It can be brought at any time. Tomar ba'olas re'iyah, whereas by olas re'iyah it's different. Shekavu alazman, there's a set time for it. That's why olas re'iyah is okay to bring, but nedarim and nedavos is not okay to bring. So Amru lahem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai responded, Avzu ein kavu alazman. Even over here, when it comes to the olas re'iyah, it's not a set time. That's an because we learned in the Mishnah. Mishalo chag b'yomtiv rishon shel chag. Let's say on the first day of yomtiv of Sukkot, you didn't bring the carbon. So chogeg v'holech kol regel kulo. You have the entire regel to bring the karbanos. V'yomtiv achron shel chag. You can even bring it on the last day of yomtiv of Sukkot. So it doesn't have to be brought in yomtiv. You have the entire holiday to bring this carbon. So Amru lahem Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel said back, Avzu kavu alazman. No, even over here there is a kviyas of zman. There is a set time. That's not because the Mishnah does say Avar haregel v'lo chag, if the regel passed and the person didn't celebrate, the person didn't bring the karbanos, eino chayav b'achrayu, so there's no chiyuv to make it up. Meaning, even though you have the entire regel to bring this particular carbon, but there's a deadline. If you don't bring it by the regel, the mitzvah has passed, and there's no opportunity to make up the mitzvah. So the fact that there is a deadline, that's called a kaviyas of zman, and therefore you should be able to bring it even on Yontif. And so the Beitzah continues, Amru lahem Beis Shammai, so Beis Shammai said back to Beis Hillel, V'alo kvar nemar lochem v'lo legavoa. Doesn't the pasuk say you only can do things lochem that you're going to partake from? If you're preparing food for yourself, it's okay. It's not good legavoa. So Amru lahem Beis Hillel, so Beis Hillel said back to Beis Shammai, V'alo kvar nemar la'Hashem, but it also says in the pasuk la'Hashem, called to la'Hashem, as long as it's for Hashem, it should be permitted. Imkain ma tamad lomer lochem. If so, what does the pasuk mean when it says lochem? Lochem v'lo lekusim, lochem v'lo leklavim. That simply means you prepare food for yourselves on Yontif, but not for the kusim. And you can prepare food for yourselves, but you can't prepare for the klavim, for the dogs. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Abashol omra b'loshen acheres. Abashol, he phrased Beis Hillel's argument in a different language as follows: Uma b'mokom shekiroscha setuma kiras rabcha psucha. If in a situation where your oven is closed, the oven of your master is open, meaning again on Shabbos when you're not supposed to cook for yourself, but you're able to bring karbanos. So b'makom shekiras chapsuch, in a situation where your oven is open, meaning on Yontiv when you're allowed to prepare food, when you're allowed to cook for yourself, and you know din shekiras rab chapsucha. Certainly the oven of your master should be open. You should be able to bring karbanos. V'chein bedin, and that also makes sense. Shelo yehei shulchan chamalei v'shulchan rabcha reikon. It shouldn't be that your table is full and the table of your master is going to be empty. So of course you could bring these karbanos. And the Gemara now explains, b'mai kamiflgi. Well, what is the machlokes over here between Abba Shaul's version of the argument and the version that we had before, the previous version? So the Gemara explains as follows: Mar Savar, one holds Nadarim Unadavos Kraven B'Yomtiv, meaning Abba Shaul holds that it's a broad argument according to Beis Hillel. You can bring all karbanos on Yontiv, even Nadarim and Nadavos. Umar Savar, but the first Tana that explained the Machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, that Tana holds Ein Kraven B'Yomtiv. You're not allowed to bring it on Yontiv, and that's why the argument was limited to the Olas Re'iyah. But in that first version, even Beis Hillel agree you're not allowed to bring Nadarim and Nadavos on Yontiv. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Huna says, L'divrei ha'omer Nadarim Unadavos ain't craven b'yomtiv. According to the one who says that you're not allowed to bring the darim and nadavos on yontiv, lo tema midoraisa michsa chazu. Don't say that the explanation is that on a doraisa level it's permitted to bring these karbanos. V'rabbanan hu degazri bugzeira Hashem yisha, and it's just the rabbanan who say they make a decree that we're afraid you might delay. If you're allowed to bring it on yontiv, then you're going to wait till yontiv to bring it. We don't want you to wait that long. Rather, even on a doraisa level, you're not allowed to bring the darim and the davos on yontiv. Because the shtei halechem, which is the carbon that is brought on Shavuos, that's an obligation to be brought that day. There's no way that you can say that there's a gezeira there that you might delay because you couldn't bring it beforehand anyway. And the shtei halechem we know is not docha Shabbos and yontiv. Rashi over here explains, Lo tema midoraisa michsachazu. Don't say that on a doraisa level you could even bring it. The Hashem mashma called the Hashem afilin and the darim and the davos. You could even bring the darim and the davos on yontif. Shema yisha, and the only issue is a gezeira. You might delay at hamoed. You'll purposely wait till the holiday. Sheyehei lo basar matzei beregel. That's when you have a lot of meat that's available. V'shema kashayavu hamoed yera lo ones v'nimtza machar nidro. And maybe when the moed comes, some kind of onus will happen. It's going to turn out that you're going to delay. The person is going to delay the neder. But rather, that's not the case. Midoraisa na misrir le da'asr. Even on a doraisa level, that opinion holds that nedarim and nedavos it's also to bring on yontiv. Techiksiv la Hashem dumya dev'chagosim ka'amar olos hadomos l'chagiga. When it says la Hashem, it's similar to the word v'chagosim in the pasuk. It means to say carbon ola that's similar to carbon chagiga. Shezman kavua beregel kamosa, meaning things that have a zman kavua on the regel. And what's the proof that this is true? The shtei halechem da'atzeres. Because what about the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread that are brought on Shavuos? Techovas hayom hein, those are obligations of the day. Ve'enon ru'yin lavo kodem l'chein deligzar busha miyasha. You couldn't bring them before Shavuos, so it's not an issue of delaying. It's not like we want you to bring it earlier, therefore we say you can't bring it. Hoel v'yachol le'fosan me'erev yontiv. And since it's possible to bake it from before yontiv, Amor Rabbanan Meseches Menachos, the Rabbanan say Meseches Menachos, De'ein Dochin Lo Shabbos V'chulu. It's not Docha Shabbos and Yontiv, Ba'afiyosan. You're not allowed to bake it on Shabbos and Yontiv. That aspect of it is not Docha. The lav dumya de chagigahu. It's not similar to chagiga. Shezman shchitasa kavua beregel. When it comes to the chagiga, it has to be shechted on the regel. Ve'eno yachol lahaktim ulacher. You're not allowed to do it earlier or do it later. When it comes to alechem, you're allowed to do the baking before Yontiv, and you have to do the baking before Yontiv, and there's no issue of shema yisha. So obviously it's a doraisa issue. You're not allowed to bring the darim and the davos. That's why you're not supposed to bake the shtei halechem on Yontiv. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. They ask the following question. L'divrei ha'omer nedarim and nedavos ain't craven b'yontiv. According to the opinion that holds, you're not allowed to bring nedarim and nedavos on yontiv. You can't bring karbonos that are voluntary donations on yontiv. So avar v'shachat mai. What happened if the person transgressed and he shechted such a carbon? So Rava Amar Rava says, Zorek es adam al menas lahater basar ba'achila. You sprinkle the blood on condition to allow the meat to be eaten. And Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Zorek es adam, you sprinkle the blood al menas lahakter emurin lo erev, on the condition that you're going to burn the emurim on the mizbeach in the evening. And Rashi over here explains. Avar v'shachat mai ma'usha yizrok es adam. The question is, again, you have this carbon neder and a dava that you promised to bring, and so what happens if you shecht it on yontiv when you're not supposed to? Can you do this rikas adam? The question is, can you sprinkle the blood? So again, Rava said, you sprinkle the blood al menas lahater basar ba'achila. Kilomer, what it means is as follows. Im habasar kayim, if the meat is still around, shetehei rikaso tzorech yontiv, and then what's going to be is that the sprinkle of the blood is a tzorech of yontiv, sheyochal habasar hayom, meaning you'll be able to eat the meat today if you sprinkle the blood, zorek, then you could sprinkle the blood. V'imla, but if you don't have any meat around to eat, eno zorek, then that does not allow you to sprinkle. If the sprinkling of the blood will allow you to eat from the meat of that carbon, then you can sprinkle the blood. Otherwise, you can't. And Rabbi bar Rav Huna said, "Al manas lahakter emurin la'erev." You could sprinkle in a situation where you're going to be able to be makter the emurim on the mizbeach. Meaning, afilu ein kan ela litzorech hechsher carbon lahachsher carbon she'ein yachol lizrok balayla. Even if the situation is that you're only sprinkling the blood in order to make the carbon kosher, because you're not allowed to sprinkle the blood at night. V'haktaras v'emurim kasher kol halayla, and the burning of the limbs on the mizbeach that can happen all night. V'yamten ad shetechshach v'yaktirim. So you'll do the sprinkling of the blood during the day, and then you wait until dark, and you can burn the emurim on the mizbech. So Rabbi bar Rav Huna is saying you don't need to have that you're going to be eating the meat to allow you to sprinkle the blood. You can even sprinkle the blood if it's just going to be in order to burn the emurim on the mizbeach. And so the Gemara says, "My beinayu." What's the practical difference between Rava's approach and Rabbi bar Rav Huna? Ika beinayu nitma basar osha avid. Very simple. The difference is, let's say the meat became tamei, or the meat was lost, and now you don't have any meat. So, are you allowed to sprinkle or not? Le Rava lo zarek. According to Rava, you would not be allowed to sprinkle. Le Rabbi bar Rav Huna zarek. According to Rabbi bar Rav Huna, you would be allowed to. Rashi says, Le Rava lo zarek afagav delat malacha. Even though it's not a malacha to sprinkle the blood, gazer ba mishum shavus. It's a derabbanan, and you're not allowed to do it because since you're not doing it for any purpose of eating the meat, according to Rava, that's a problem. According to Rabbi bar Rav Huna, that's okay because you can still be makter the murim on the mizbeach. And so the Gemara continues. Meisvei, they have a question from the following brisa. Kivsei atzeres, when it comes to the sheep that are brought on atzeres, that are brought on shavuos, sheshachtan shelo lishman. Let's say you shechted them not lishman, you didn't do it l'shem the carbon. O sheshachtan bein lifnei zmanon, bein lachar zmanon, or let's say you shechted them before the zman or after the zman. Hadam yizorek v'habasar yochal. You sprinkle the blood and you eat the meat. V'im hoisa Shabbos, and if it's Shabbos, lo yizrak, you don't sprinkle. V'im zarak, but if he does sprinkle, we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Kivsei atzeres haboyim im shtei alechem. Together with shtei alechem, the two loaves that were brought on Shavuos, you also bring these two kevasim, these two sheep. Kedechsive parsha shor o kesed bo atzeres v'asisam sirizim echad lechatos u'shnei kevasim. And Rashi continues, shalo lishman, you shechted these kevasim not lishma, meaning shetzarach l'shachtan l'shem shalmei tzibur. Really, you need a shechted that it's for the sake of the carbon shlamim, of the public carbon shlamim. V'shachtan l'shem ola. Instead, the person shechts it as a carbon ola. Or it said lifnei zman, and you shechted it before the time, kodem atzeres, before Shavuos. Ve'im hufrashu l'shem kivsei atzeres. They were separated to be sheep for the again for the kvasim for atzeres, and you shechted it before the time. So hadam yizrek v'habasar yochal. You sprinkle the blood in any case, and you eat the meat. The kaimolon kol azvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman. The general rule is when you have karbonos that are shechted not lishma, so kasherim likarev, you can still bring the carbon. V'nachon, they can be eaten. Ela shelo ola lebaylan l'shem chova. But if there was an obligation that the owner needed to fulfill with this carbon, you don't fulfill that obligation. V'im ha'isa Shabbos lo yizruk. Now, if it was Shabbos, you don't sprinkle. Sha'arei aser levashel v'litzlos hayom. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to roast that day. V'lo yochal min habasar. So you can't eat from the meat. So therefore, you can't sprinkle. V'im zarak v'lo nimlach. Now, however, let's say the person made a mistake and he ended up sprinkling the blood. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph.